All right, well, we're going to get the meeting started here. Good morning, welcome. My name is Mark Dowling. I'm the Chief Executive Officer here with the Inland Valleys Association of Realtors, and this is our monthly membership meeting. Historically, this was always our breakfast meeting, and right now it is our Zoom member meeting. So bear with us as people get healthier and COVID hopefully becomes something in the past. We will move on and start the year fresh and have live meetings again. So today I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker. We'll get him going here in just a minute, but before I introduce him, I'm going to do his little bio so you have a better understanding of who Lou Monville is. Lou is Senior Vice President of the Raincross Corporate Group, which is a collection of businesses involved in real estate development, entitlement process, convention center management, operations and catering, and convention center sports marketing. More importantly, from our perspective, he is currently the Interim Executive Director of the Riverside Building Industry Association. Additionally, Lou is a Trustee Emeritus and past Chair of the Board of the California State University Board of Trustees and a former member of the California Community College Board of Governors. And with that, please welcome our guest speaker for the morning, Mr. Lou Monville. Good morning, Lou.
Good morning, Mark, and nice to be with you all and be with folks who are like-minded and committed to giving everybody an opportunity to be part of the American dream and home ownership. I am going to say I see up on my screen a Carlos Rodriguez. I'd like to know if that's my colleague in the Baldy View chapter out there, because then he can weigh in if I miss any important points about what's happening both in the BIA and housing. So,
well, without pulling him off of mute, I believe that's a different Carlos Rodriguez.
All right, good. Well, you never know. I was going to say you might get 2 for 1 today. So, anyways, well, listen, it's a pleasure to be with you. As you know, let me give you a little bit about the BIA. The BIA of Southern California makes up the Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange County, LA, Ventura chapter. So we're the largest home building association in Southern California and the largest member of the California Home Building Industry Association. We are much like IVAR and realtors are your voice in Sacramento on issues related to housing. The Building Industry Association, both of California and of Southern California, are the voice of home builders. We, like you, are working to have communities that are family and home friendly, that allow for development of all type to solve the critical challenges that we face in our region and throughout California as it relates to the housing shortage. I was just talking with Mark a little bit earlier in the space that you all operate in, that folks are sitting on houses longer, that they're not selling them as quickly. That's reduced. There's a reduction of supply that affects both you all in the resale market, but we have the same challenge on the for sale, the new home market. We cannot keep up with the population demands and needs. And truth be told, California really hasn't done that since the 60s. And there's a number of factors that go into that, but we are proud to be the advocates that are working in Riverside County, primarily along with my colleague Carlos Rodriguez, the other Carlos Rodriguez in San Bernardino County, trying to provide opportunities for new housing throughout the region. So what I told Mark I would do is provide a little bit of an update of what kind of a recap of what happened in Sacramento last year. There's been a lot of press on a couple of key bills in particular that maybe have caught your all's attention. I'll cover those. Give you also some news on some bills that unfortunately did pass and I think are going to continue to affect pricing, and then talk about kind of what we see coming down the pipeline. So much of what's happening in Sacramento related to housing impacts us on the local levels and is going to impact the communities where you all work. And so I'll try to kind of sew those themes together and then leave plenty of time for questions and answers such that I can do that. I shared with Mark and the team. They can share with you later a couple of I don't know if you're going to post those in the chat, Mark, or how you want to do it, but I shared with your team 3 fact sheets on kind of the 3 big bills you've probably read a lot in the press. SB 8, SB 9, SB 10. Those were kind of the three big bills that were made up of the housing package that got a lot of press, probably shortly after Labor Day, when those bills were approved and then ultimately signed by the governor. I won't go into gritty detail on those. You can read those fact sheets. There's plenty of information online when your team shares them with you. But SB 8 is frankly just a housing development bill. It's an extension of something called SB 330. Basically what it does is it prevents jurisdictions from converting land that's set aside for housing in general plans and zoning from removing that. And frankly streamlines the ability for home builders and developers to implement zoning and general plan codes to get the levels of density that we're committed to in those city plans. It's had a very positive effect since SB 330 was approved. It's had a very positive effect in increasing housing production. It was set to sunset, so it has extended the life of that bill to January 2030. It's also put in a bunch of technical fixes, but the long and the short of it is it keeps land that was set aside for housing to be left for housing and allows some ability to increase that density as demand needs. So one that we were very supportive of and was one of our job, like many organizations, we run a list in Sacramento, job killers, job creator, or housing build, house builders, housing creators. This was definitely a housing creator. We're happy to see it pass. SB 9 is probably the one that all of you have heard about. That is probably the one that has come with the most controversy. CBIA supported this bill. Our Southern California group, we stayed out of this bill because of our fear related to local control. But that is known as SB 9. SB 9 is probably the one you're hearing that's the kind of by right an ADU or by right lot split. What the bill does is basically allow at a local level a ministerial approval of what we would call a granny flat or a casita on an existing piece of residential property. There are a whole host of technical components to how that works. I won't go into those in detail, but it certainly streamlines that process. I think the concern you would hear from our friends in local government, which is a legitimate one, is that single family existing subdivisions have certain things built into them: power supply, water supply, sewer supply, parking, and that this legislation may or may not consider those. I think for most of us who work in this region, I live in Riverside, right? ADUs have been a very common practice in this community for a long time. Riverside is a community that's been blessed with, very large lots, very common that families live here for generations. And so it's not uncommon to see an ADU already built on a property. But there are interpretations of this bill where they think, where a single family home could become a fourplex, et cetera. I think some of those are overblown. Most analysis say, this bill will probably only impact about 15% of residential lots across California. But I did want to cover it because it did get a lot of press and garners a lot of attention. I think for you all in your world, it'll be interesting as that happens to see as these become more prevalent in the marketplace. What does that look like with resale? When someone's moving, are they selling that primary resident and the ADU, or are they going to split those lots, which is allowed under SB 9 and try to do that as two separate transactions? I think that'll be interesting. So it's years down the road, but it'll be interesting in your all's world to see how that shakes out. Finally, SB 10 was a bill that was allowed zoning of any parcel for up to 10 units of residential density by local governments. Frankly, it was a technicality. This bill, really, this existing law was in place. However, there are places like the city of Redlands where this legislation has been overwrought by local initiative. And so this actually allows the local jurisdiction to override a local initiative to bring this into conformance if there's a 2/3 vote of the legislative body. Again, the goal trying to be, I think the state has been working towards having a uniform set of policies and goals as it relates to housing across the board. And I think this is more along those lines. Now, unfortunately, there were some bills that we did not support, housing killers, one of which I'll share with you that was very concerning, that was unfortunately approved and signed by the governor. That was SB 727. And it creates a new right of action against general contractors for liabilities they did not cause, and allows for punitive damages in order of 15 times the damage. What this basically is, you're a home builder, you hire a general contractor to manage a job, they hire a sub, that sub doesn't treat their employees properly, doesn't give them the wages and hours that they were required to do. The fine and liability goes to the general contractor who hired that sub. First off, it's going to add a ton of cost, but secondarily, you're not going to hold accountable that sub who really committed the offense. It's going to allow bad actors to flourish. So we have a number of concerns with it, not only on costs, but on allowing, bad actors in the contracting world to get a pass on not treating their employees fairly. And so that did unfortunately pass. We'll have to see how that shakes out, but our estimates are that is going to increase the cost of housing production. It's also going to slow the cost of housing production because we think general contractors are going to be far more selective as to who they bring on with subs, and rightly so. One bill that we were successful in holding off this year, SB 12, was a wildfire mitigation bill. We expect that to come back. This is one I would encourage all of you in the inland regions to pay attention to. Be clear, the BIA absolutely understands the concern of wildfires. For those of us who live here in the Inland Empire who have seen our friends and neighbors be victim of them, we think wise fire protection and planning is the right thing to do for our neighborhoods and our communities. However, the reality of it is when you see these massive wildfires, most structures that burn are construction pre-1985. Things built after the mid 80s are far better planned, far more fireproof. And so the position of the BIA has always been that, we should be in a position where we are looking at mitigation of fire impacts versus prohibitions. And SB 12, as was written this last legislative session, would have wiped out whole sections of housing that has just been approved in your local jurisdictions or is in the process of being approved in your local jurisdiction's housing element. Again, constraining land available for development. And for those of us in the Inland Empire, where you have a great tradition, let's take in the upland, Redlands, Ranch Cucamonga area of preserving canyons and open space. In Riverside County, where you have the MSHCP, again, responsibly conserving open space, it would have greatly impacted lands near those open space areas that would have required less residential near them. The whole goal with a lot of that environmental planning was to find a balance between preservation and conservation and development. And this would have undercut a lot of those local efforts in our region. For those of you who have occasion or get a chance to thank one of our local assemblymen, Kelly Ciarto out of Murrieta, please thank him. He's the vice chair of the Housing Assembly Housing Committee. He was a real leader in the charge to kill this legislation. He comes from a community that would have been adversely impacted by it. Again, constraining supply is the last thing we need right now. What we need to do is, again, not prohibit houses, but think about how to mitigate them and do proper fire planning, which we do all over this region. So that bill we expect to be back in the next legislative session. It won't be under the name of SB 12, but be on the lookout for it. So I've given you a lot about what happens in Sacramento. Let's talk a little bit about what happens in Sacramento and how that transitions down to the local level, right? You're all familiar with RHNA and the challenges that all of our communities are having to meet the housing goals that have been set forth by the state. Always a challenge. Take the city of Riverside, which just approved its housing element. Their RHNA responsibility was about 18,000 new units in the next 10 years. For those of you who know Riverside, between its agricultural preservation areas, a lot of geography challenges, getting 18,000 units is a challenge. What we believe in the BIA is giving local jurisdictions as much flexibility as possible to achieve those housing goals is important. Unfortunately, what I think we primarily are seeing out of Sacramento, things like this wildfire mitigation, while again, a laudable goal to protect us from wildfire, it hampers those local decisions to achieve new housing supply. And so we're very, very concerned about that. There are two other areas that I think you're going to be hearing more and more about, which we have concerns about. One of which I want to thank your colleague, Paul Hernandez, who's been active with me in the city of Riverside. The city of Riverside is considering an effort to do all electric homes and low-rise apartments starting in 2023, well ahead of state mandates, in an effort for decarbonization. Now, to be clear, we recognize in the BIA the climate crisis. The BIA is for long-term decarbonization, but we're very realistic about the marketplace that we're operating in and what we actually can or can't do from a physical infrastructure and technical standpoint as it relates to decarbonization. And so we think it has to be a process that slowly transitions, allows energy options for consumers. It is not a one-size-fits-all enterprise. You know, you can't live without air conditioning in the Coachella Valley, for example. So thinking through how decarbonization efforts happen is important. I appreciate the leadership of the city of Riverside, including industry stakeholders, ourselves, IVAR, our colleagues at the Apartment Association in those discussions. But be clear, one of the things that's being talked about in Sacramento is to mandate heat pump water heaters in all homes, new homes starting in 2023. My guess will be once that mandate comes into place, I think you could see a mandate that anytime an old home sales, to convert that home. What does that do to your marketplace? The reality of it is, right, 60% of the homes in California were built pre-1980. That's the homes that are producing the carbon. And right now, there is no discussion in Sacramento or in most jurisdictions to deal with that issue of retrofits, right? And so much as they have done through other efforts to regulate your all's transactions, I could see an environment, right? 10 years ago, I bet we didn't have to have you didn't have the smoke detectors. You didn't have to have the carbon monoxide detectors. So why not now mandate when you transition a home, take out the gas water heater and put in an electric heat pump? Is that happening? No. Has it been proposed? No, but it's a logical progression of what California has historically done. And so I would encourage you to be watching these efforts on decarbonization, because I think the only way they may be able to get to retrofitting some of these older homes is doing that as a part of a transaction when those older homes are sold. Riverside is very fortunate, as are a few other jurisdictions in our region, Colton, Banning. You know, if you have your own utility, you can incentivize some of that work. But there's just not enough dollars to go around. And so, again, we're happy to be partner and discuss those issues. But we would tell you, you're going to want to watch the issues related to the building codes and electrification very, very carefully. I don't know if anyone on this call has purchased an electric car and then got the shock that they had to change out the panel in their home from a 200 amp panel to a 400 amp panel. Depending on the jurisdiction you're in, that's a $12,000 to $15,000 piece of equipment being installed in your home. If you have to do that on the front end of a new home, that's $12,000 to $15,000 more in the cost of that home. And so in a place where price is a high sensitivity, the more of those types of mandates, while laudable for the environment and something we need to look at carefully, we have to be careful that we don't further exacerbate the issues related to access and affordability. And then finally, I think we're going to continue to have to work through the issues of affordable housing, right? The reality of it is when the state removed redevelopment, they eliminated the major source for affordable housing throughout California. Affordability is a real issue. Affordable housing is a real need, but how we do that and how that happens in jurisdictions is going to be very, very important. It is not a one-size-fits-all solution as well. There are jurisdictions in the Inland Empire that are now considering inclusionary zoning. There are places where that has worked. There are places where that has failed. We've just seen a new study come out of the Central Valley where some new inclusionary housing ordinances in the Central Valley have caused the prices of existing housing stock to go up 5 to 6%. and the cost of new housing stock to go up 10% because that new housing stock is you're paying a premium to offset, affordable fees. So I would encourage you to keep watching those issues. I know realtors and the home building industry, we're working together on a lot of these issues in Sacramento. We appreciate that opportunity to partner with you all. We'll look to continue to do so locally. I think we have a lot of mutual interests and issues that we face together, and we look forward to the opportunity to work with you. So with that, I've covered a lot of ground. I will stop there. I want to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion on the issues that we all face. And thank you again for the opportunity to be with you all.
Great. Thank you, Lou. If you have questions, hop on the chat function within Zoom and type it in, and we will get that to Lou. Before that, though, let me ask a question, or kind of make a statement. Lou and I both served on the City of Riverside's housing task force. We were appointed by the mayor. The City of Riverside was going through a housing element update for the city. Just to let everybody know, it is a complicated process in California, and probably in most states, but probably more so here in California. So when Lou was making comments about RHNA, which stands for the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, that's the acronym for it. I mean, there is a layer upon layer of bureaucracy and government oversight. So maybe, Lou, can you take just a minute and kind of talk about where that comes from at the top with, at the state level, and then how that plays out at the regional and then the local level? I know it gets complicated, but maybe just take 60 seconds and kind of put those pieces together.
Yeah, the funnel works kind of like this. At the top is an organization called Housing and Community Development of the state of California. That is the state agency that is charged with, seeing that we have adequate housing supply for California and for its economy, right? It is not, there's a lot of politics in, folks like Elon Musk moving his businesses to Texas. But one of the things that he cited in his recent move was, he can't expand his Fremont plant because no one can afford to live in the Bay Area. So those issues are real. So HCD sets based upon a whole host of economic and population standards goals for providing housing supply in regions of the state. Those then get pressed down to our regional planning organizations, in our case, SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments. And SCAG goes through a very complicated exercise amongst elected officials from Riverside, Orange, San Bernardino, Ventura, and LA County to take this big number they get from, HCD and parcel that out amongst the counties and the cities. And they went through a 2-year process to do that. Historically, candidly, it's always been a battle between the coast and the inland communities. Historically, LA and Orange County have said they have had enough, and they send a disproportionate of those units out to inland communities, particularly Riverside and San Bernardino counties. 2 years ago, under the leadership of Riverside Mayor Bailey, he was able to strike a compromise with LA County that changed that formula and really, for the first time, broke the housing allocation responsibilities out equally amongst all of the jurisdictions in Southern California, whether coastal or inland. The difference on that, Mark, and I don't remember exactly, I think our RHNA number for the Mayor's Housing Task Force that Mark was talking about, ultimately we had to do 18,000. Had they not struck out that compromise, it would have been like 27. It was like a third more, is my recollection. Then after those numbers are parceled out, those jurisdictions have to go through, and you're probably reading about this in all your local jurisdictions, a housing element update. And what that housing element update is basically an amendment to your city or county's general plan to figure out where that new, in Riverside's case, 18,000 residential units are going to go in the next 10 years. And Mark and I were a part of the process to help the city of Riverside through that. It's a complicated enterprise, particularly in cities like Riverside that are essentially built out. I think you will see, you have the issues of cities being built out. Then you have regulations like VMT, vehicle miles traveled, which really force new units into areas where there is public transit, which is not as robust as you would find in coastal communities here in the Inland Empire. So closer to major transportation corridors, et cetera. Riverside also has the constraints, as do many jurisdictions in the region. Redlands comes to mind, of agriculture that has to be protected. So you have to put all of those factors into the mix to get to, what the city of Riverside called opportunity sites, and where can we get the density to provide the housing we will need. Those plans then ultimately get approved by the local jurisdiction, but then have to go to HCD for concurrence. So City of Riverside approved theirs last week. Great deal of controversy with, many of my friends and neighbors who think Riverside has enough housing. But I think HCD will approve that plan and they'll move forward. I did notice from Robert Carrillo in the chat a question related to how are you dealing with affordable housing in Riverside? That issue of affordable housing is a part of that formula, Robert. So in that 18,000 units, there are allocations for housing based upon various income ranges, 50% of median income, below 50% of median income, 50 to 70% of median income, 80 to 120% median income. I don't remember those figures, but there are allocations for that. I think getting to your broader question, Robert, I think Riverside's been very proactive on trying to identify ways to achieve and find locations for the affordable housing. Their constraint is the same constraint that most other jurisdictions in California have, and there's no funding source for it. Historically, the funding for affordable housing came through redevelopment, which is now gone. So while the state continues to mandate the requirement to provide affordable housing, they really don't have the funding streams for it yet. So right now, cities like Riverside, it's a combination of taking little pots of money for all kinds of different federal and state and county programs to cobble together projects, which is probably why we're not meeting those needs as quickly as jurisdictions would like. So I hope I answered your question, Robert. But yeah, it's very, the folks that do affordable, I know several in that space. It's very important work, providing a home for our seniors, for our veteran population. But boy, it is a challenge as it relates to funding.
Now, Lou, you're talking about affordable housing in this particular instance. It's basically subsidized housing that basically offsets cost and it lets people buy homes below market rate. On the market rate affordable housing, that's where it gets kind of interesting, if not impossible in a lot of ways. As you know, working in the building industry, there's a lot of fixed costs when you build. So you buy the land, which is a fixed cost, labor, materials, those are all priced at market level.
Local fees,
all of that is basically set in stone, so to speak. So the only way, really, if you think about it, for a builder to make money and build an affordable product is one of two things: get higher density, which allows the builder to build more units, and to build smaller homes, which allows for lower, material costs
and lower the land basis.
Exactly. That's about it. Now, the challenge politically is if someone comes to the city council or to the city planning commission first and wants to build a higher density, smaller unit project, what is the typical response in the community?
In my private business, I've been involved in affordable developments, right? I did an affordable seniors project here in Riverside years ago.
But that was senior.
This was
which
seniors,
comes with
right?
it a little.
And AKA at the time I did that was primarily World War II and Vietnam veterans, right? And the overwhelming response from the neighbors next to that project is, we don't want it. We don't want those people in our backyard. And I'm like, well, those people fought for your freedom to come to the city council to say no. Ultimately, the jurisdiction saw through that, but it puts local electeds in a very difficult position, which I appreciate. It often, the state's requirements through HCD and the housing elements very often puts local electeds in conflict with their constituents, and it's a very difficult position for them.
In other words, from a political standpoint, there's really no political incentive for a local elected people to approve higher density, smaller unit development projects. Because as you said, people in the community think that attracts the wrong type of people.
Yeah, I think that's going to change, right? There has been a lot of talk in Sacramento that this cycle of RENA, this cycle of everyone's housing elements, that if you're not making progress towards them, that the state is going to withhold local transportation dollars. And in a region like ours, again, that is under-resourced in transportation infrastructure, facilities, and dollars, I think if you start to provide constraint, right, you start to provide that, stick versus the carrot, I think you're going to see some action. Again, I applaud the jurisdictions that have been really working to try and achieve this. Riverside's been very creative. I see, Robert, I see your note in the chat. It's been an all of the above strategy in a city like Riverside. You have private for-profit developers working on affordable. You have nonprofit sponsors. They did a great affordable project up at Grove Community Church that the church basically underwrote and supported. There's a project that St. Michael's Church is doing here in Riverside. So right now, because of the constrained dollars in particular, it's an all of the above strategy to provide this. But it is always with fraud, typically neighbors don't like it. Now, I will tell you, and I could take you around jurisdictions throughout this region, Fontana, Ontario, Riverside. I could take you to some marvelous affordable projects. You wouldn't know it if I didn't tell you. Looks like any other apartment community. So it can be done well. And that's incumbent on us to help break down the barriers and the fear for our friends and neighbors who may not know exactly what it is that's coming to their backyard. They don't need to fear it. They're generally good neighbors. Look, senior housing is a classic example. Seniors don't have big parties on the weekends, and they don't drive around a lot. So there's not a lot of traffic, not a lot of noise. That's a pretty good neighbor in most neighborhoods.
Lou, you'd mentioned the idea of local control, and historically the California BIA and its chapters and the Realtor Association world, we've always, not always, but generally speaking, we've always supported local control. However, we've seen a shift the last several years with the ADU legislation coming out of the state, and with SB 9, for example, where realtors got behind that. Part of that is just a little bit of a frustration in our industries relative to local government not being incentivized and not being politically rewarded to approve projects. And we're seeing a shift towards state mandates or state kind of overarching policies. Do you think that's going to continue?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do. Look, and look, I'm a free market guy, right? So I'm all about incentive. Provide incentive, don't provide mandates. But I do think what you're seeing in Sacramento is a reaction to HCD saying, look, every 10 years for the last 50, we've been approving these, and we're not making, market goals on our, on our housing targets. Now, that being said, I also think our friends in Sacramento need to take a look at the broader package of other things they're doing, right? On one side, again, you're approving a bill that provides for housing production, but then on the other hand, you're approving a bill that, let's say there are conversations right now of eliminating all wood construction. I can't even begin to tell you what that will do to the pricing of residential units, let alone the supply of building materials and the tradespeople, the different types of tradespeople it takes to build that way. So I think what we've got to continue to do, working with our partners in Sacramento, is think about housing in a comprehensive and holistic fashion, and strike a balance between housing affordability, housing accessibility, the environment and climate change, and still making sure that folks have their shot at the American dream.
Fantastic. Are there any questions for Lou? If so, hop on the chat room and get one typed up for him.
I thought, and Doug, did I see? I might have seen Doug Shepard's hand up. He's right next to me, so I didn't want to skip him. How are you, Doug?
I'm fantastic. No, you answered the question. It was about NIMBYism in our area and the effects of that. I mean, we've had a condo project get stopped. We've had a downsizing, a lot of things. But you answered it well, and I'm fine.
Okay.
Good to see you. Thanks.
Likewise, good to see you, Doug.
On this issue where it's kind of strange NIMBYism, where you have the typical people in the community against a project. The other issue is you have local government sometimes over conditioning or putting conditions on approval of a project that are onerous, parking, for example, higher density projects where they're looking at a variety of amenities that may be above and beyond, which causes the cost to go up. Are you seeing a shift in local government on some of these conditions coming out on properties and projects?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. First, I'll talk about a state move last year. This was a great housing creator bill. AB, I think it was 642. Let me double check that number just to give it to you right. 602, Grayson, Assemblyman Grayson, a great bill. Fees are different by various jurisdictions. There's reasons for that, but the way they formulate those fees are different by every jurisdiction. I get that costs are different and needs by communities are different, which would necessitate different fees. But calculating the fees should be done the same across every jurisdiction, and AB 602 will require that, and I think that will help. I think, Mark, going back to our experience in the Mayor's Housing Task Force, I think Riverside has been a shining example of how to rethink, some of these, would have been kind of standard conditions for every project to say, hey, are these really applicable, right? Parking is a great example, particularly in the advent of the rideshare environment with Uber and Lyft, et cetera. Post-COVID, more people are working from home. That changes the data in your traffic studies, right? There aren't 5% of the population working at home now. You've got near 20%. So there are places, so I give Riverside a lot of credit for that. They've really thought through some of those and are trying to be nimble and creative. There are some jurisdictions where that is still a struggle. But I think the big battle out in our region has always been lot size, right? Well, the reality of it is, for those of you who know or have a millennial in your family, they don't want a 7,200 square foot lot. They don't want to spend their weekends maintaining a yard and mowing a lawn. But interestingly enough, the data shows they want a single family home. They don't want to share walls. So they want their own space. They don't want much of it. They want to spend their time and their dollars on experiences, right? They want to go out and eat. They want to go out and dine, et cetera. I think, Riverside is another example of a community that's gotten very comfortable with very small lot, single family detached. That helps in so many fashions. A, it meets the market of what people want. B, it helps with affordability as land prices go up. C, it helps with construction costs because those units tend to be easier to construct and to replicate. But I do think, Mark, we have to continue to be diligent on the issue of those local needs. Look, we all want to have great communities with a great quality of life, but we cannot overburden projects to the point that they're not affordable. And it's one thing in this environment to be able to put a few more bells and whistles on a project. When mortgage rates go up another %, that's going to be a different animal.
Absolutely. And just to let people know, I was involved in a project one time in a regional city here in the region, and the project, they wanted 5 parking spaces to be available for every single unit that was being built, which was a ridiculous number, obviously. And when you have to factor in the space for 5 cars, it doesn't work sometimes. So anyway, I don't see any other questions in here. Is there any last comments you want to give us, Lou, on the way out? I know you've got a meeting with a city council member here in a few minutes. So
yeah, no worries. Listen, again, I just appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. We have a lot of issues in common, and I hope our organizations and our boards can continue to partner. I think we all want the same thing. We want great communities, great places to live, work, and raise families, but we also want to be able to make sure that the next generation of our workforce, of our economy, and of our communities can afford a home, can stay in the communities where they were raised. And we've got a lot of opportunity to work together between realtors and home builders to continue to keep that promise here in the Inland Empire. And I hope we can continue to partner with you in that regard. So.
Fantastic. Thank you for your commitment, for all that you do in the community, all the service, the committees you serve on. And thank you for giving us some time today and sharing with our membership. So with that, I'll let you go, Lou.
My pleasure. I'll see you at the next Mayor's Housing Task Force, Mark.
Thank you. Very good.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Quick FYI to everybody still on the call, just a quick announcement. I'm not sure if everybody knows this, but the real estate purchase agreement and joint escrow instruction contract is being updated. There is going to be a new contract for everybody to use. So it's pretty good idea that you know what those changes are. And just to let you know, IVAR is sponsoring 3 separate classes on 3 different dates, same class, 3 different times, free. 3 hours. You can sign up for it. The first one is going to be on October 21st from 1 to 4 p.m. If you want to sign up for it, and you do have to sign up in advance, go to IVAR's website at the very top of the page. You'll see the calendar section. Click on that. October 21, click on that link and you can sign up for free. There's also dates in November if that first one does not work for you, but please do sign up for it. We already have about 200 people signed up for that first class. It's all Zoom, and it's important you take the training because you are going to be surprised come mid-December when you see a new contract come up on zip forms, okay? With that, we are done for the day. At least with this meeting, I want to thank everybody for participating and being on this call and looking forward to seeing you for our November meeting. With that, have a great day. Take care.